Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to you all here and to you all online for this panel on Alliances, a pillar of any sustainable socioeconomic model. To talk about this topical issue, I am fortunate enough to have as panelist Josiane Cornelou, the president of ANPP Project Territories, Laurence Poirier-Dietz, the Director General of GRDF, Axel Lemaire, former minister and now working at the French Red Cross. She's not with us right now, but she will be with us soon. We also have Carole Orchamps, General Delegate of the RNMA, the National Network of Houses of Associations. And last but not least, Bruno Courme, Director and co-founder of Total Energies Foundation. Exactly 10 years ago, we launched with Convergence a column on a call for co-building a new world. So a call for co-building for a new world. It was 3 years before then southern countries asked from North countries to add a 17th goal, the goal of how can we co-build a future world. Because, of course, we need to go beyond individual needs to meet the needs of everyone. Easier said than done. And in 2015, we finally set the 17th goal, a long-term one, and that is why the 193 countries of the UN decided to solve and reach this goal in 15 years. So where are we at now? The good news is that the impact study on the SDG 17 in France are positive. The results were published in April, and on the 3rd of November this year, the results will show that we now want to forge alliances. And this is good news. 81% of French elected representatives, 92% of mayors, 84% of company heads and association leaders consider that it is a necessity for us to come out of the crisis. We need to forge partnerships. So it is great to wish for alliances, but the question is, how can we walk the talk? And that will be our challenge today and what we will debate this afternoon. The issue of alliances is also a matter of innovation, trust, and performance, as the impact study of the Observatory of Partnerships shows. So it is important to take stock of the diversity of socioeconomic models and see what the position, the place of alliances are. So as you can see, Convergence has published, and other actors have published works with a special file on general interest socioeconomic models. And last but not least, there's the CAP 2030 plan for new socioeconomic models. You might not be used to it, but every third Thursday of the month, so on the 15th of September this month, we will be dealing with education. How can we co-build long-term models for education, and how can we invent the balance together? So here is the debate that we are having in France, but that is also taking place internationally. So it is of the utmost importance to address those topics, and that is what we do in these world forums. And Every year, we are delighted to facilitate a panel on the prospects of those topics. And this question that we're dealing with today during this session, be it for a public or a private player, what is the position? What is it interested to forge alliances? That is the debate we will have today. So there will be three parts to this session. First, what are the practices? What are the challenges? Secondly, we will hear feedback from three players in the field. And thirdly, we will have a Q&A session to debate with you in the audience to see how can we interact better together. So now I'm turning to my panelist, Josiane Cornelu. Since 1986, you've been an elected representative. You are a department advisor and an MP in your area, and you represent ANPP, an association gathering elected representatives in rural areas. This network is quite dynamic, and there are many things that you initiated, like reciprocity agreements. So you have been experimenting different types of alliances in rural areas, even before we started talking about this question. In 2021, ANPP published a very interesting publication entitled Let's Dare Territories. And at the time, you were negotiating new contracts for the green transition in rural territories. And rural territories were there to make proposals to make sure local specificities and needs were taken into account. So what are the conditions to fill up, to put in place a project that is relevant locally and that rise up to the challenges that we're facing? Josiane. Good afternoon to you all. First, I would like to thank you for having me in this panel. This is a fascinating topic, and we are a part of the goals that you mentioned earlier. The ANP that I chair gathers 262 territories. That is 67% of the surface area of France, which means that we do know rural areas in France. And we deeply believe that we need to work hand in hand to move forward. And we are focusing on the Territories project. As you said, we've had a publication that is called Let's Dare for Territories, which means let's trust territories and let's build together and for all. We are convinced that we need to be more accurate when defining this Territories project. You might have noticed it. Many people talk about Territories project, but we do not see eye to eye on what Territories projects are. So to us, this Territories project is first and foremost a strategic vision. It is important to see in the future, to see long term, so 15 years, 50 years even. And we need to ask ourselves, what do we wish for this territory in 50 years? What should it look like? We need to take into account its assets, its strength, but also its weaknesses. And that is the red thread for us. This is our roadmap. So how do we do this? First, we work through an integrated approach. Public policies and regulatory tools need to be consistent to make this project a reality. And this is also a shared approach, an approach that we share with all of the stakeholders. And I agree with what you said. We need to work hand in hand. And when I say all stakeholders, I mean every single one of them. Elected representatives, socioeconomic representatives of the territory, associations, council representatives, and citizens. And all together, after this whole reflection process that will define our 20, 30-year-long strategy, that we will define actions to implement. You've said it, we are reaching the end of a cycle. We are going through a major transition, a digital transition, a demographic transition, an environmental transition. And any transition takes time. Any transition requires for behaviors to change. And changing behaviors takes time. Everyone needs to understand the purpose of this change of behavior. And to do so, we need to support every stakeholder. And mostly, and that is the goal of this defined strategy, is for the stakeholders to understand why they are taking action. So that is a way to reinvent public policies by making them purposeful and by involving all stakeholders. Moderator, you said that you wanted consistent public policies, regulatory tools, so basically educating, which requires local engineering. And you've underlined how important it is to invest in this local engineering. And I think you have a practical guide that will be published soon. So why should we invest in this local engineering capacity? Answer. So we will release a second publication soon, and we will focus on this concept of local engineering for the transition. We wanted to be quite accurate when talking about engineering. Of course, it is a branch of the territorial authority, but it's not quite visible. So what is this territorial engineering of transition and development? In concrete terms, it is support provided to reach the defined goals. It also means financial engineering, financial support to get subsidies, for instance. And it's also a cross-cutting vision when it comes to challenges and tools, and it's also a facilitating role. And we've also worked on a petition to fund 1% of engineering. So for an amount of 100 euros, €1 will be allocated to local engineering. Because if you do not support such action, and if you do not support the local people and make them understand that they need to change, you need to raise awareness, otherwise you can't move forward. Of course, there are budget constraints, and most of the time elected representatives do not think long-term and do not see why we need to support change. Moderator, thank you for this answer, and we can see the three facets of a balanced socioeconomic model. Of course, we need financial resources, but we also need to forge partnerships. How can we co-build a project on a territory so that all stakeholders are involved? And there is also the facet of men and women facilitating and implementing this dynamic of partnerships on a territory. So there are legacy partners And for example, the RNMA, the National Network of Houses of Associations. Carole Auchan is the general delegate of RNMA. She was supposed to be with us today, but because of an accident over the summer, she won't be able to join us physically, and she asked Paul Bucco to replace her, and he will convey the message of RNMA. So let's listen to a player of local engineering. Good afternoon, Paul Bucco. Thank you for being with us to this World Forum 3.0. You are in charge of missions at RNMA, the National Network of Houses of Associations. And let me remind you that in 2021, the Third Congress of Mayors underlined the importance of co-building public solutions and public policies that meet the needs of the citizens, working hand in hand with them. So my question is, how can we involve local citizens, and what are tangible examples of this? Paul, thank you for having me today. When it comes to involving citizens, we work over time. All the different associations, houses of associations that are present in different cities have a long-lasting relationship with the citizens, the cities that they are present in. They work with association representatives and other citizens, and thanks to those houses of associations, they forge a relationship with local people, and with tens or hundreds of associations, we manage to gather thousands of committed citizens. And in the past few years, we've been more and more citizens involved in different projects. And we try to involve them in the thinking process. And we use all this accumulated knowledge of those committed citizens to let them think beyond the borders of the reflection of their association. Question. For several years now, the RNMA has been working with different public but also private stakeholders. So how do these new types of negotiations impact your action today? This is a new trend, but a long-term trend. We've seen different types of cooperation over time, but what's more recent and what's speeding up, especially in the last 10 years, the cooperation with local authorities in a collective fashion. So there are bilateral relationships, but also other initiatives that are much more collective. For example, multilateral meetings with technicians, elected representatives, and other players are organized. And people are not often convinced that this type of meetings can be fruitful. But we have realized at the RNMA that practices are evolving, and that people's skills are upgrading. People are seeing the point of such meetings. And so those meetings become efficient, innovative, and even the people who had not bet on such meetings then change their minds and want to continue such work. And then Of course, we work with associations, local players, but we also try to work with universities and companies. And some houses of associations are working as searching partners to find new partners. And then you can have the same logic, debating an issue identified by researchers or companies, and then involve several players from the public sector or from associations. So first it starts with a common diagnosis, and then we make common recommendations. So we do not always work at the scale of small associations. We try to rely on the local network to start co-building projects. Moderator, thank you for this answer. And I think I remember that last spring, within the context of the reflection that you mentioned, you started an action research on the core business of your association as a catalyst. The houses of associations can work as catalysts. You are a partner of Acidel, and of course, we would like to hear more about all those actions. Thank you very much for being such an attentive observatory of this capacity to move forward while taking into account the commitment of citizens and the needs locally. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Moderator. So after public engineering, private engineering, that is as close as possible to the territorial needs is also necessary. And as Paul Bucco said, we can find the three dimensions of any social economic model. I said it in my introductory remarks. During the 103rd Mayors Congress last year, AMF invited me to talk about how we can co-build our future with local citizens. And what was interesting, what the journalist said, is that for the next Mayors Congress, we should address all this new trend. In 2015, we defined the 17th Sustainable Development Goal, and we all wondered how we could forge alliances. For those of you who were here 1 year ago, you might remember the testimony by the Minister Sarah El-Haïry and the MP Katia Rambosan during the ministerial meeting. And they told us how we could speed up such partnerships between public and private players while taking into account local needs. And they told us about the outcomes of this roadmap. The interministerial delegate to youth, Emmanuel Perez, was there as well. The Ministers' Council from last week decided to redefine the conditions. Along with Marlène Chapin, the minister couldn't have someone free to tell us about this 2.5-year-long ministerial roadmap. So the co-president of those works will be there to tell us about it. And I think we have a graph on screen to understand this. So the main question about new alliances and the capacity to forge alliances is how to value what's already existing. I said it, after 5 years of impact studies, tens of other studies, 50 debates at the territorial level, the impact study in France has shown the capacity of territorial administrations to co-build, and most mayors want to include the co-building capacity in their action plan. 57% of companies also want to forge partnerships and associations. 97% of them are working on partnerships where they are operating among peers, but with other players as well, just like Paul Bucco said, with companies and academics. So firstly, valuing what's existing also means asking ourselves what is the direction we want to take. And that is why we focused on the SDG number 17. Because as Madam Chair reminded us, alliances have already been forged to reach the 17 SDGs. In this systemic vision, there is already an existing reality, and this reality can be joined. So we can be a local authority, a foundation, an association, a citizen, a company. We need to be able to share those common directions. So how can we do this? How can we make this a reality? Hundreds of national, territorial, public, and private networks have been involved on defining a legal framework. And in February 2021, we now have laid the legal foundations to do so. And French law is based on protecting individuals, physical or natural people. An alliance means a risk in France. So how can we have a framework that protects individuals within those alliances? And that will be the debate. Many prefects have thanked us, and you will see it if you look at the National Assembly text. You will see many definitions, very interesting definitions. For example, why local authorities and companies cannot move forward in such alliances, what are the risks that they are taking, because it is interesting from a technical and legal point of view to qualify all this. And finally, the MPs that were steering this mission along with me realized that the education code, the general service dimension is not there. So we need to add in our education code two essential notions: cooperation and general interest. So going beyond the individual to co-build together. But a legal framework is a good thing. But of course, in a rural area, we might not use it every day.
The question that's here is, what is the contract for confidence that we can have? If we think about the different territories here, the idea is to build together with volunteers, with the businesses within a territory, and the foundations and territories with a charter for the alliance, so that we're able to have a contract in place that can be debated, that can be looked at with 7 means 7 modalities to access these different circles, as I mentioned. And we also need communication. The important point here is that when we started with the association.gouv.fr, when we launched our digital space, Alliance and Territories, we had no convictions with regards to the use of this platform. And during the heart of COVID, it was launched on the 7th of May 2020. During the heart of the pandemic, a year afterwards, 11% of the for the passage, 150,000 visits a day they're using this question. Therefore, we can see that it is working closely with the territories that this question of how concretely we can put into place alliances is asked. And then once you've got this framework for communication, the major question is how do you capitalize on best practices? And once again, I would like to thank the SDG 17 for having invested in this collective work. We've also got the platform ODG 17, so SDG17.org, using the different competencies that have been made available by everyone. And if you really want to live this, there is a workshop that will be organized just afterwards, organized on how we can accelerate these alliances within the territories. The third condition now is also very important. How do we evaluate this? And it goes without saying, obviously, the fact that we've got the observatory, or the conservatory rather, for the different partnerships within the framework of the 5-year mandate has got an institute for research so that they're able to look from 2018 and take 5 years to look at an impact study of Alliance in France. It was a very timely opportunity. Why? Because 2022 saw us feeding back on the different aspects. You'll find the research specs here that were published for Alliance in France. You'll find the synthesis of the summary here. It's on the 3rd of November. We'll be able to come together at the Caisse des Dépôts so that we're able to talk about this and think about how we can really bridge gaps, put into place alliances and concretize on the different organizations, be they public or private. Innovation, be we talking about social or territorial, and also of trust, be we talking about collectively or individually. And therefore, we will also have a vision that will conclude this citizen vision, 81% of whom understood how urgent it was to put into place these alliances. And on the 3rd of November, there'll be a new study conducted to see what the citizen thinks of this alliance. And the fourth exercise, which is probably the most important or the most complicated that is currently underway, is the following. It is about modeling and economic modeling. How can we valorize, how can we give economic value to alliance, so the fact that we need to make alliances between collectivities, municipalities, academic actors, government actors, and also territories. We know how to look at economic modeling, but how can we look at the interaction between all of them? So everyone has their niche, and this is a vast subject of research. There's something that is going to be driving us over the course of the next few years as well. That's why I said a couple of years ago we had a call to common building and co-building, and we'll be back in 10 years to see what the result of this modelling is, the bonus of the alliance. I hope that we can kick things up a notch, but obviously this is time-consuming. Why is it time-consuming? Because if you're trying to qualify what the model of each and every actor is difficult, but qualifying what we're all doing and how we're doing together and how we can add value to the capacity to contribute together so that we can together do what no one can do it alone. This is where the countries of the South put forward the 17th SDG. The answer will come in 2030, and I hope that it will be satisfactory. We will have learnt how to co-build in the past 15 years, but we still have 7 years to wait. Therefore, today I'm going to give you 3 very concrete examples. 3 examples of actors who, on a daily basis, are really living and breathing this alliance. The DNA constituted this alliance, and as you've understood, we're going to ask an association. And which actor here to speak about this? A business and then a foundation. Therefore, Axel Lemaire, it is now your turn. We're talking about an association that is not really an association because it's an auxiliary of public power. So every single signing member of the Geneva Convention for the creation of the Red Cross, wanted to act together, invent together, come up with solutions for the most fragile of us all. And as I mentioned in my introduction, you are the delegate for strategy, transformation and innovation at the Red Cross on a daily basis. And I will say that for the past 150 years, it has been part of your DNA to act together on the territory. But what are the different conditions for these partnerships to really be balanced and also sustainable? You've been around for 150 years, so what does balanced and sustainable mean? You wouldn't think I was 150 years old, would you? Thank you very much for having given me the floor. I'm delighted to be able to be part of this panel. Yes, I have been working at the Red Cross for 6 months now, so if I may, I can start with not answering your question. Why? Because the call that was launched 10 years ago corresponds to the time at which I was elected deputy. I have been a politician, I have worked in the private sector, I have worked for the state, and now I'm working for an association. Therefore, I think it's very interesting to look at the journey that we've taken, because I think it's important to look at different attempts that have worked or well or not well, and I think that they've probably been we've had more failures than successes. I am very heavily embedded in the Anglo-Saxon doctrine and approach. So yes, we're talking about the southern countries of the southern hemisphere, but also Western countries and of the northern hemisphere, thinking about these steps, bringing together different organizations and sharing common objectives. The way in which the question was asked is also very French in terms of general interest, but I think that this is a process that is actually universal. My observations are the following. There have been a lot of progress with regards to the capacity to work together. And in the space of 1 decade, I think that digital solutions have their role to play. Why? Because we've seen a lot of progress. I was a politician in a previous life, and I was actually quite surprised to see that the stance, and maybe this is a little bit of a caricature here, I apologize for that, but the stance taken by private companies with regards to policies was a stance that was relatively exclusively linked to lobbying. They were looking at defending their own sectorial interests of them as a country. However, if we think about the stance taken by companies, it was about financing and also taking into consideration the interests of beneficiaries, of those who are being supported, and this through the representative role played by associations. But we weren't really looking at common solutions. It's something that I tried to do. I was able to, I think it's a common result here. Why? Because it was built with different citizens, with businesses, with researchers, and with politicians. It is not by accident that this was adopted unanimously by the National Assembly and the Parliament and the Senate. I believe it was the first and only time that this has happened. Why? Because not only was there time for consultation or co-building, but also determination of determining common objectives and looking at compromises so that we can get to these common objectives. This was from a policy point of view, and for the private sector now, what I have seen, and very surprisingly so, is a lack of knowledge when it comes to general interests or general points of interest from a political point of view, but not only. Why? Because above and beyond just the private interest of the economic sector and businesses, it wasn't a question of ill will, but there was a lack of knowledge of this shared general interest, or a culture of general interest. Maybe we're talking about local municipalities and so on and so forth. And those who were in charge of public relations and lobbying were the best translators, if you will, the best platforms to define common and commitment. But this unfortunately came at the detriment to employees, because employees, they also wanted to react and this above and beyond just their own jobs. When I got to the Red Cross, I'm sorry for this storytelling. It's important to set the stage, but I'm setting the stage because I can see the progress that was made. As I mentioned, we're looking at a huge old house. Did the Red Cross need others to react? Yes. If we think about the National Society of French Red Cross, we're talking about 17,000 employees in different healthcare centres and social centres. For those of you who don't understand how the establishments work, we're talking about creches, nurseries, homes for the elderly, those with disabilities. We are speaking about inclusion, support for migrants, for women of victims of domestic violence, and we have a very vast outreach not only in continental France. We also have thousands of volunteers who spend their time, their weekends, helping those in need in different events because they have been trained in first aid and they're contributing to the resilience of our population, especially to overcome different crisis situations. It is also a group, therefore we're looking at subsidiaries for all the while looking for economic models, but no dependence for on public powers, and this despite the very particular status that has been given to the Red Cross as an auxiliary to public powers. The idea is to have our own economic model, which means, for example, for a subsidiary like Croix-Rouge Insertion, so the Red Cross for Insertion. I also work at 21, which is an accelerator for social innovation within the Red Cross, and we are looking for alliances so that we can have an economic model that is true to ourselves. And I believe that currently the Red Cross has taken stock of the fact that we cannot act alone. I have spoken about the power, the presence, the impact that the Red Cross has, but if we think about reality, the war in Ukraine illustrated this. I think that even the pandemic or the healthcare crisis, we've got two successive episodes that have shown, and majestically so, the need to work within alliances for the Red Cross. Why? Because we had companies coming to us to give us money, and without financing we wouldn't be able to react. I'm not saying that we shouldn't or that you shouldn't be giving financing to associations anymore, but we received money. But they also wanted to give us manpower, and that's quite new, to have platforms, to have different volunteer networks for one-off missions, for sponsorship, to really add value to what we're doing within private structures. And this is an approach that is a lot more integrated as being important from an expertise or operational point of view. So money, people, manpower, and also ideas. This is where the faire alliance, come together in alliance, is important, especially when we're trying to find new but very quick responses to newly identified needs that can also be new, to have the capacity to respond on a scale that has real impact, bringing together all of the different competencies around the table for Ukraine. We have seen an influx of tens of thousands of people with a high level of education, with competence, with a will for professional integration, and this very quickly so, and also a need to respond on a humanitarian front for natural disasters, and also different ways in doing so that are unique to international humanitarian action. And this could be a Paris Gare du Nord. But what do you do if that's the case? Well, then you team up. You need an alliance. I cannot talk about the pandemic as much because I wasn't yet at the Red Cross at the time, but for Ukraine, we really launched tools. We co-built solutions with our external partners. I can give you a couple of examples if you wish. For example, innovation is important. You need to think about new ways of doing things, think outside the box. We also launched an experiment to develop means of transferring money to migrants, those who had fled from Ukraine, and this with digital tools, allowing us to facilitate opening a bank account, because accessing a bank account was difficult and has always been difficult for migrants in the framework of the Ukrainian crisis. And thanks to partnership with a public banking actor and also with a supplier of solutions, and we'll be able to find a solution. We also have emergency housing. This is housing that we have been filling with IKEA furniture. We've had very important discussions with Airbnb. These are very concrete examples and things that we're doing with public powers. I spoke about our official role as an auxiliary to public powers, and also with public interest, for example, putting back the promotion of international human rights, bringing together families as well. But if I needed to sum this up, we don't have any other choices left. We have to team up. We have to put into place alliances. It is the perfect moment for us to look at different stakeholders to try and adopt this approach. Thank you very much for sharing. There are 4 essential points that we need to try. I really like the fact that you're saying, okay, we don't know, but we need to try. Trial and error. And the second point is that even if we have a very specific model for general public interest, we are talking about a global approach. Therefore, everyone is trying to look for their own rationale with this. Maybe we can look at what are the common points that exist rather than just looking at your own model. And the third point that was important was how, before co-building, how do we learn who the others are and what are the different interpretations that we can have, so that we're able to build with them. And you mentioned a third or fourth point as well. You said that since 2010, we've been able to see this cell come to light, but also all the work for innovation at the Red Cross. And this is a vector, not only to have the means to act, but also to invent solutions. And the Accelerator 21 underlines this. We were talking about the employees at the Red Cross, but also the other actors that come into play in an alliance between the mouse and the elephant, so that we're able to benefit from this together. And we can see that even when we're as strong as we are as the Red Cross, there is a necessity to work together. And now I'm going to look to our next speaker, Laurence Prayet-Dietz, because obviously we can say that this is something that we've heard time and time again. We have heard different territorial networks, we've had businesses, but businesses don't need to team up. You can go it alone, no? Co-building is just for the others, no? But no, not at all. It's part of the DNA of GRDF. We can see that this co-building is important, and it's at the heart of your strategy, your business strategy. And why is this so? Why is it so important for a business such as GRDF to come up with solutions, not just for, but with the territory? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm delighted to be able to exchange with you and to share GRDF. A couple of words here for GRDF now. Obviously, it goes without saying that the current crisis means that we're talking about gas a lot. We are the primary distributor of gas in France, GRDF. We 11 million customers with a network that goes to the farthest flung basis, 2,600 kilometers. Why were we asked, or why did we have to move to a different relationship with local communities? I think that it's a very trusting relationship, but also collaboration built around co-building. Why? Because the world of energy and also the planet means that we're having to completely rethink our models and to work. We spoke about this and we hear about this a lot. I'll tell you this right now. Looking for carbon neutrality for 2015, but also to protect the planet that we want to leave to future generations. If we think about fossil gases, fossil fuels, do not have a place anymore in our future, in our energy future. And therefore, the question that GRDF has been asking and was asking 10 years ago is that within our roadmap and our strategy, what can we do to ensure that within the energy mix, so using 25% of gas currently, how are we able to have an energy mix that is balanced and also decarbonized, all the while having the capacity to use our legacy and the legacy of the different gas infrastructure. We keep talking about gas stock and transport and our networks of distribution. And what our conviction was, rather, it was a strategic reflection that we started about 10 years ago, is that the potential of renewable gas, so green gas, exists in France and also exists for 100% of gas consumption that we will have in 2015. And this conviction is something that we have spoken about. There are dozens of studies organized. So what is this? What are we talking about when talking about renewable gas? There are three sources to start off with. You've got biomethane, and this comes out from agriculture. So agriculture and biomethane. And we can talk about this because we have been in place different alliances in order to completely transform our business. From agriculture, we've also got waste and biological waste as well, which means compost, our peels, which is going to become obligatory, or mandatory rather, for people in France. And then we've also got waste stations. We have progressed a lot with the different local communities. These are parts of our distributors, aren't the ones that are selling gas or supplying gas. They're just moving gas from one point to another to the final user. And therefore you have the network development 24/7, which means a relationship that is in play every single day. If I think about what has changed in our modus operandi, but also in the way that gas is consumed, is looking at different biomethane projects in the territories. So that with local collectivities, but also other actors who have really had to work on this alliance, the FNSA in France, the Chamber of Agriculture, so that we've been able to play a role in sharing this legacy. General interest articulates itself rather around this legacy. We're not talking about things that currently are in experimental phases. I would say there are about 450 producers of biomethane in France connected on the different networks, be these transport networks or distribution. This is between 1.5% and 2% of consumption in 2030. So 2030 is just around the corner if we think about building here and co-building. We will have the capacity to have 20% of 20% is a little bit more than what France we used to buy from Russia every year for its consumption. This co-building model with the territories is something that has changed us Why? Because we needed to go and work with a certain number of actors that we didn't know. New actors, we needed also to change our skill sets. And this allowed us to open and to be present in the different territorial projects. When we install biomethane plants, we're also consuming green gas. Green gas to take children to school, for rubbish collection, for other types of uses, which means that above and beyond just this waste and methane, there are two other products coming from gas. And also looking at chemical or replacing chemical fertilizer. In France, we are able to look at circular local economies in these territories for energy production, which will allow us to find sovereignty, to have decarbonized energy, and also to use a network that is available thanks to this legacy. What is passionate in what you're saying right now is that we realize that things that may seem completely impossible aren't that impossible. If we are innovative, we think outside the box, we can hit these targets. And we are on the right track. Not only are we on the right track, we've also got the capabilities to do this. We just need to change our perspective, and we need to co-build solutions together. You mentioned this in our prep meeting. You spoke about the debate that you had with the FNSA, and they said that 5 years ago you would never be having these types of conversations. The capacity, the capability to invent these types of solutions that seem impossible exist. And that's the first point. And what I also liked about what you said is that, yes, solutions are right there, but we have to find them together. That's the first piece of good news. The second piece of good news that you're giving us is that you're saying it's not just about 3 economic models, there's a 4th one as well. If I ask people, okay, what's the economic model? They say, okay, well, the business model is production. There's also a business model for sales, and then you've got a business model for investing or redistribution, regarding what side of the fence you're finding yourself on. But within all of this, we also have alliances. We also have word of mouth that's important. And Madam Chair, if we were to replace energy, physical energy coming from gas, with energies coming from men and women on the territory, it would be the same logic. How do we give value to something that we thought was simply a technical tool that came out from, there's a tube, out of the tube comes gas, and that's the value. And you can also prove to us that if we want to be successful in the transformation, we need to look at putting alliances in place so that we're able to give meaning to this structure, that we're able to create ties as well, so that we can have wonderful sources. And there is a third aspect. Madam Chair, we need to use public policy and also public constraints. Here, we were talking about bio-waste and the fact that there will be a mandatory collection of bio-waste in these different territories. You're not going to say the contrary, but when we're in a huge city with huge means, it is maybe a little easier to do than in other territories. And how do we find solutions to re-articulate these links? What I find absolutely passionate about this, my dear Laurence, is that you're reminding us that companies are, first and foremost, creators of wealth for all. And that is an element that is quite important. We did get things mixed up when we're talking about the economy, but at the heart of economy, we need to find balance at home, and this is exactly what you are demonstrating with your business. Businesses must be actors of balance in the household, just as anyone else. So I have a question now. How are businesses impacted, and how do they contribute to the transformation that we've just spoken about?
Écoutez, dans l'entreprise, on a d'abord...
the company, we've communicated about our their strategic plan. So we are trying to involve all employees at our GRDF, 11,600 employees. All our employees are part of our Green Gas Academy. So all employees will find out about green gases, what is our green roadmap. And what I found interesting is to show everyone what is everyone's contribution in their daily task. I believe in corporate strategy when it is rolled out by all employees at all levels, when they are aware that they are committed, that they are involved in the strategy. Sometimes there are great strategies, but they are not rolled out in the proper way. And sometimes involvement of employees is lacking. So involving our technicians has allowed us to change the model. Gas comes from a transport network and we distribute it to the end customer. Tomorrow we'll collect it. So tomorrow we will change the system. We are already starting because we already have 450 injection points. So we are overhauling the system. We will now have to deal with producers, deal with flows. So this is a totally different business. So this is quite a radical change of our business in terms of operating the network, the relationship with biomethane producers, the relationship with local authorities, and the relationship with new stakeholders. I think I can say that 10 years ago, the relationship between GRDF and the agricultural world was non-existing. Nowadays, this is a daily relationship, and our skills have evolved. We now have agricultural engineers at GRDF. We didn't used to have them. And thanks to them, we can understand farmers' needs. And we want to have a long-term strategy. We want to take into account local agricultural needs. And we want to use common sense and be in line with the general interest. So we have created specialized team, and they are specialized in biomethane. And so we are going through a transition now. And this transition will be sped up. We have created a foundation at GRDF 2.5 years ago. This is a small-scale foundation. It is fledgling, and we wanted it to be territory-oriented. And the project that we are working on is the commitment of our employees. Why? Because I think we have reached a level of maturity in terms of relationship between the company and the different stakeholders. And this is my wish as a CEO, is to have a company that represents the society as much as possible, because if we are not representing the society, how can we understand it? And so after working so much with local projects, local stakeholders, we now have the ability to offer our employees to commit for several days within different projects, using a system of platforms. I was mentioned before, the idea is not for everyone to do whatever they like, but that they bring their skills in different projects. And I think it is important that we contribute as a corporate national player within the territories. We need to have an active role in this energy transition. We need to go towards renewable energies that can be stored as well. So in the last people we hired, they told us it was the reason why they came to us, and so it showed how attractive our company could be. Moderator, so thank you for saying this. So now we're seeing how we can create value to be attractive. We have talked about alliances partnerships and the men and women that are part of companies, and how these men and women can be involved. And thank you for telling us about this foundation, and thank you for allowing me to go through this segue. I think this is a simple one. You made the link between three different topics that are not always presented in a consistent way within corporations, and that is the commitment of employees, the corporate and social responsibility of companies, and how you can go beyond those aspects as well. This gives us another vision of federations. So it breaks from the vision we had in the past. So this is the perfect segue. Now let's turn to Bruno Cormet. You are the director and co-founder of Total Energies Foundation. This is the largest French foundation so far. And since 2020 and even before, you had taken part in France S'engage. And the oldest among yourself will also remember the Youth Fund that started in 2009. So you are an aficionado of the Alliance. But in 2020, you decided to implement the roadmap of those strategic alliances by creating the 17 SDG Fund. And in 2022, you renewed this commitment by you have renewed this commitment. So the Total Energies Foundation is such a giant that we might wonder why you would need other players. But you have decided you wanted to listen to the territories. And with this fund, you want to embody the diversity within the territories. So what are the lessons learned? And could you give us some examples of how diverse territories can be in the way they find solutions? Bruno. Thank you, Charles Benoit. I don't know if we are a giant, but let me start by reminding you what the Fonds ODD 17 does. It was created by the Total Energies Foundation and Le Rameau. We have invested 1.5 million euros in, first, the knowledge on alliances, secondly, on experiments, and I will give you two or three examples, depending on how much time we have, and thirdly, to encourage the alliances at the national scale. First, let me tell you why we are convinced that it is of the utmost importance to forge alliance and why it is part of our DNA. The sector in which we have been historically operating is dealing with large-scale energy projects. And because those projects are on such a scale, we need to have partners to share costs, but also to share knowledge, especially when it comes to individual safety. And this is a major topic that we share with our partners. So this need will be reinforced in the future. We see it on a daily basis. Taking into account everyone's expectations when it comes to social, economic, or environmental concerns, it will become more and more difficult. So no stakeholder, be it public or private, will be able to act alone. And this is true. This applies for the general interest as well. So we forged partnerships as part of the Youth Fund you mentioned earlier, with the Red Cross as well, and more recently with the project at Gare du Nord. And to give you one or two examples, there is an intrinsic complexity related to the territorial needs. the north of France, the south of France won't have the same needs. So we need to involve local players, because it's not in La Défense, in the financial district of Paris, that we will find answers. So one of the goals of creating this ODD17 fund, we wanted to find the richest answers to our question. We supported 16 experiments in the territories. First, an association called PRC3C. It is a group of companies, and I'm not in the best position to tell you about it, but I can tell you how the fund has helped them. So the objective was for those companies to gather to improve their commitment and their performance. And the excuse to get together was to create a possibility to value waste. They managed to reprocess them and reuse them with vulnerable people. So several companies gathered with a common goal, and the fund managed to give them the engineering tools like funding or networking or tools providing, because we wanted to bring them an investment so that their socio-economic model lasts over time. So during the experiment, public actors were also involved to collect waste. So there was this dynamic of alliance, public and private alliances, and we created an economic cooperation area, and the fund helped to find and choose the right model for this alliance. And thanks to this experiment, they now want to reproduce this experiment. For example, when it comes to territorial mobility or building material recycling. So thanks to this experiment, there were positive outcomes because we made it possible for several stakeholders to work hand in hand. Second example I wanted to give you, in Loire-Atlantique, in the west of France, the goal was different. Once again, I'm not in the best position to tell you about this project, but what's interesting is how the fund helped them. It was a corporate sponsorship experiment, and there was a lacking link. So the issue there was to consolidate the ecosystem with stakeholders that did not discuss. So for a year, we organized several workshops with up to 34 stakeholders. And with the help of the fund in engineering, so the fund tried to guide them, and the outcome in May was the creation of a foundation with qualified experts. And we created the appropriate governance so that all stakeholders remain at the same level. We don't know how it will unfold, but at least this federation raised funds and will try to fight inequalities. So those were my two examples. Thank you, moderator. So companies gathered around one environmental and territorial experiment. So it's great to see that such a project was created and that it was approved by a ministry. And your second experiment shows that whole territory can also be involved. And in both experiments, You supported those actors right from the start. And so you need to believe in those experiments. And I think this is the role of your fund. You use the economy to the benefit of the general interest. So why have you invested in this alliance engineering process? Once all those projects are created, you could only invest now. Why is it important to invest, as Madam Chair was saying, in local engineering? And why is it important to make the link between the different stakeholders? Answer. So to answer your question, why investing in engineering, let's go back to our core businesses, our core trades. Those projects can only be implemented after an engineering step. And this is the prerequisite for us for expertise. So this is part of our DNA. We know we have to go through this engineering step before seeing results. So the word engineering is quite clear to us. What also matters is for different stakeholders to get to know each other when they are not familiar with one another. And I think that engineering allows us to leverage all this. And I wanted to mention one last experiment called Ronalpia. This is a long time established body, a well-established player in the Rhône-Alpes region in the Alps. For those of you who don't know this stakeholder, it helps social entrepreneurs to develop to meet territorial needs. And the fund has helped Ronalpia. How it helps Ronalpia move away from its usual methodology. So the fund made it possible for Ronalpia to work in a new area in a more efficient way and in a faster fashion. So first, we provided them with financial support. This is important because the stakeholder had the time to think this project through. And then we provided them with tools, networking options, and we help Ronalpia in this strategic reflection and help them be a territorial catalyst. So when we try to push innovation, we need to make sure it is appropriate for the local ecosystem and make sure we're not going against local needs. So we tried to support them throughout this experiment. Now we have promoted 8 social entrepreneurs. Some of them are very well known. We're hoping it will have great outcomes in the future. We are trying to reintegrate young people, former detainees, etc., etc. So there are great prospects too. So 3 experiments, 3 examples that show how we can forge alliances, how we can consolidate local ecosystems. And we're hoping that we can have more examples. Now we have technical sheets that will help in our future projects. Moderator, thank you very much. Let's close the loop. How can those territorial catalysts be at the side of public players in implementing those territorial projects? And the main question is that the chain of command from the local level to the national level how can it be involved as well? So now we have the foundation of Lille, the oldest foundation in France, and we are fortunate enough to have Delphine van der Wand with us. So two foundations wanted to be part of a regional catalyst that has this go-between role. And so to conclude this panel, I would like you to share some insights on what it means to be a regional catalyst. Answer. Good afternoon, everyone. The Fondation Lille is a public service foundation. It's been operating for 30 years now, and it is seen as a regional catalyst. So in other words, a body that creates link on a territory to carry out general interest missions to meet the needs on the territory. As our guest said it rightly, all our territories are different and we have different needs. Territorial foundations are not as developed in France as they are in the United Kingdom or in the English-speaking world. So I congratulate the Total Energies Foundation to have created this fund because it will allow us to see the rise of territorial foundations. So it will be the first actor to fund engineering. And this is what it lacks when creating regional catalysts like our foundations. There's always an initial capital, but most of the time we are lacking funds. So we need to build a project to have all the stakeholders involved in the field and then implement actions. The Fondation de Lille can say how important this fund is. For the past few years, we've been experimenting with this fund. We don't have a legal status right now. There are several foundations also involved, and we managed to host the territorial foundation of Loire-Atlantique. And we also hosted another foundation. The difference between the first territorial foundation hosted by us and the territorial foundation of Loire-Atlantique is time saved. The one in Loire-Atlantique is ready to operate. We worked for a year and a half with them. We gathered about 40 stakeholders, and it's now ready to operate. So this is one thing. We saved time, and we launched a tool that is now ready to solve the inequalities on this territory. And then there is a leverage effect from the fund. The GRDF Foundation was also part of the launch of the Loire-Atlantique Foundation. And as a hosting foundation, we were reassured to see the following. When you're hosting a foundation, the hosting foundation bears the legal responsibility. And so we have a legal department working on governance. So it was reassuring for us as a hosting foundation to see that the Foundation Loire-Atlantique can launch their project. So to conclude this panel, let's conclude with territories projects. I think that you are convinced, Madam Chair, that the ANPP is not alone to be an activist when it comes to the capacity for those territories projects to develop. Local authorities are not alone. Associations like the Red Cross, houses of associations, companies like GRDF are by your side. And I think we can applaud ourselves because the SDG 17 is already underway. What will it be in 2030? Have a great day.
Et ceux qui veulent le vivre en pratique, vous pouvez le vivre à un atelier qui va commencer à...
There will shortly be a workshop. It will start at 4:15 in the Agora.